Okay, so my name is Megan Johnston. I'm tuning in from Florida, though I was in person this whole summer. I came home to be with my family for a vacation this week. But my project dealt with the quality assurance and quality control for the GREON water quality monitoring program. It's a lot of qualities, I know. So GREON stands for Great Rivers Ecological Observatory Network, and it's a series of these buoys right here on the right that we have throughout Illinois, and we actually have a couple in Wisconsin. And they're put out on the water and they collect water quality data that then we use. So if we take a look at this buoy, there are several parts of it. On top, we have a weather transmitter that takes in different measurements of wind, temperature, pressure, and it has a rain gauge. We have solar panels. Those give the equipment power. Then we also have a light on top. That's so that the boats won't run into it at night. We have pontoons at the bottom. Those keep it afloat. And then lastly, we have technology and sensors inside of these boxes. So if we open the box here, we see a lot of different things. There's a battery, again, that powers our equipment. We also have a pump, and that takes in water from the river and pumps it through tubes, and then those go into our sensors. So we have two different sensors. One is our sonde. This collects the majority of our data. So we have water temperature, we have conductance, which is essentially the number of ions, amount of ions in our water and how conductive the water is. Turbidity is water clarity. Optical dissolved oxygen, that's the oxygen that fish and other organisms need in the water. Blue-green algae is a measure of the a cyanobacteria. It's a certain kind of algae, and it measures the pigment. Chlorophyll A is a measure of the photosynthetic algae. And then FDOM is fluorescent dissolved organic matter. So if you think about things that are decaying in our ocean, that's your dissolved organic matter. And then we also have a nitrate sensor, which measures the amount of nitrate. That's important for plants in our waters, but it can also be a measure of how much runoff and fertilizer there was. So we have these buoys, like I said, across Illinois and a few in Wisconsin. On this map on the right, the yellow are active sites where we currently have buoys, and the pink are sites where we had buoys in the past. We can have up to 7 buoys out. We typically have 2 to 3 in reservoirs, and we have 3 to 5 sites along the Mississippi River. The water quality data comes in every 1 to 2 hours, and our weather data comes in every 15 minutes. The overall objective of this project was to create a quality assurance and quality control plan. The plan was essentially created from scratch using technical resources and publications, and it really creates the foundation of a useful data set and a successful monitoring program. So lots of things can go wrong when you are collecting data. This is a picture from this summer. We had a buoy that actually flipped in the reservoir. The water went up too high and the rope tugged it and you flipped it over, and we had to go out and retrieve it. When things like that happen, there should be a plan for how we address the data on the other side. So that's essentially what this plan does. The methods can be broken into 3 different sections. The first is pre-deployment. That's before the buoy goes out on the water. Second is during deployment. That's while the buoy is on the water. And third is post-deployment. That is the data that you get after and the analysis of that. So pre-deployment has 3 different sections. There's calibration, cleaning, and maintenance. So we'll focus in on calibration first. Calibration is this idea that over time, the sensor can become a little bit inaccurate. Essentially, it becomes a little tired and the measurements are wrong. So what we do is we put it in a standard. So for example, maybe we'll put it in water where we know the measurement it should be reading is 0. And then we look and see what it is reading. So maybe it's reading a measurement of 1. And then we tell it what you're currently reading as 1 should be 0. And then it corrects itself. And we can do either a 1 point, which means that we only use one standard, or we can do 2 points, which means that we have 2 different standards and we calibrate it to both of those standards. So we use 1 point for temperature and conductivity, and we use another for dissolved oxygen. And then for our 2 point calibrations, we have we have 2 point calibrations for blue-green algae, chlorophyll A, FDOM. All of those we had not been doing in the past, so that's been implemented for the future. And then turbidity, we're already doing at 2 points, so that's just maintaining. Okay, for cleaning and maintenance, for maintenance, we have to replace some things. So O-rings they kind of fill the spaces in between like sensors and things, and they seal openings. So it's really important that we're always replacing those so we don't get water in our equipment. And then brushes, you see here on the left, the brush on the top is new. The brush on the bottom is super flayed, so that needs to be replaced. Those brushes are actually used to clean the tops of all of our sensors. It goes around in a circle, and it just cleans the membranes and the tops so that we don't get like algae building up on that, but you have to replace them. Also wiping the sensors, cleaning sediment or algae. This sensor here on the left is our temperature and conductivity. That's the one that doesn't really get brushed very well, and so we have to clean off the algae and sediment manually. And you can see, I mean, the top is not cleaned and the bottom is clean. Also checking batteries. Obviously batteries can run out, so you want to replace those. And then just visually inspecting all the technology. And this needs to be done on a consistent basis. Typically we shoot for monthly, and then you also want to do it really well before deployment, so on a very consistent basis. During deployment has 4 parts. There are site visits, continued calibrations, data monitoring, and quality assurance samples. So site visits and continued calibrations, these are essentially going out on the water and what you're doing when you're out there and dealing with the buoys. And I actually had the opportunity to go out and service some of the buoys this summer. So the first thing that you do is you calibrate a sonde before leaving. Like I talked about with the calibration, you want to make sure that that data is accurate. So by calibrating it, we know that it's accurate and we can bring it out. Once we get out on the river, you want to take a set of measurements from the sonde that's currently in the buoy. And those kind of represent the last measurements of this sonde's little time on the water. And then you're going to replace the sonde, so we put in that newly calibrated sonde that we know is accurate. We also clean the nitrate sensor. We don't replace those because we don't have enough to like swap them in and out, so we just clean them each time, and that essentially reverts it back to like making sure it's accurate, and we take off all the what's been building up. And then the last part is to take a new set of measurements with our new sonde and our cleaned nitrate sensor that's just been put in. And those measurements are kind of the first of this new sonde's little lifetime on the water. And we can compare these two measurements, this kind of last pre-measurement before the sonde is replaced, and then the first kind of post-measurement when the sonde is replaced, and take the difference between those, and that's going to be the amount of error. And we'll actually use that to correct, because we know that the new sonde is correct, and we also know that that old sonde might be a little off, so we want to correct that old sonde, and we use the new sonde's measurements to do that. The other part is data monitoring and QA samples. So this is going out, well, first it's a daily check looking at the data and saying, okay, does this look right? Is it super high? Is it 0? Is it negative? Is there data? And just making sure that you're checking for that, because if there are issues, you might want to go out in the water and take a peek at your buoy to see if anything's happening there. Then you also want to do grab samples, which is where you take water from right where the buoy is about every month, and then analyze that in the lab and make sure that it matches what the sonde is saying. And then finally, you do a biannual, about twice a year check for vertical horizontal mixing. What that means is you go to other places in the river or reservoir, and you collect samples. You might do it from super low, like close to the ground, instead of up high on the water column or on like the edges, and test those. Essentially, all that's doing is saying, okay, we have measurements from like the middle of our river, but is that the same as what the side of our river looks like? And if it isn't, that's something that we should be aware of. And if it is, that's great. That's what we want. And then post-deployment has 4 parts. They are retrieve data, interpolation, deletion, and publication. So retrieving data, our data is uploaded to an API, which is an application programming interface. So we can use code to pull that data, and we pull it into a system called Aquarius Connect. And then within Connect, we run a connector. So we pull in our data from the API, and then we convert it to a new format, and then we send it back to a system called Aquarius Time Series, which is where we do our data analysis. I worked with this quite a bit to get our connectors working. And then once it's in Aquarius Time Series, we do interpolation. This is really a critical part. So I mentioned earlier that you have that error between your the two measurements that you got, the kind of pre and post measurement. And so what we do is we look at the time that sound was in the water, its little lifetime, and we want to shift the data up or down based on what that error is. So if you remember back to your Algebra 1 days, you have this equation y is equal to mx plus b. That's the equation that you use to shift the data. And so if you look at these graphs, our green is raw data and the blue is corrected. So you'll see at the beginning of the time, blue and green are on top of each other. You really can't even see the green at the beginning, and that's because the raw and corrected are the same. We know that it's accurate at the beginning. By the end of it, there's a little bit of difference. So there's a gap between the green and the blue. And so that's that correction and shifting that up to make sure that the data is accurate. Another part of it is deletion. As bad as we don't want to just delete data, but if stuff is wrong, it has to be deleted. We can't publish it because then people can go out and have analyses and publish publications on wrong data that maybe there was equipment malfunction or the buoy flipped or whatever it was. So you can see here again, the green is raw data and all of that's been deleted because there are various errors with this data. And then last is publication. So we can export our data from Aquarius Time Series and then put it on our Great Lakes to Gulf website for the public use. So overall, this plan increases transparency of data collection and will increase reliability for later analyses. Throughout the summer, I worked extensively with this data and with other quality assurance and quality control plans to create this one. I also had field experience. I got to go out on the boat, drive the boat, and service those buoys. So I could compare what we were doing in the past to what kind of the standards are and implement what would be best for our GREON program. That finishes it up for me. Thank you. I'll take questions.
So I'm not sure if she quite covered this, and it might have broken up a little bit. I know that she removed some data points if they knew that the GREON flipped or not, but how else would she determine that the data should be either moved up or moved down outside of equipment error?
So that's, I think what the question was is how else would you determine if the data should be moved up or moved down? Besides just the error. The error is pretty much what you use because that's when you're moving it up or down, I mean, it's based on that error. So there are kind of 2 ways. One, you can look at calibrations. So if you calibrate something, and like I said, like if it reads 1 and it should be pulled down to 0, well, the error was 1. So you'd shift it down. But for the purposes of our plan at NGRREC, we determined it'd be better just to look at the 2 SONs. And then just look at the different comparisons. But if that back fails, maybe the SON that you put in stops working immediately and you don't have data and all goes haywire, then you can use the calibration as a backup.
it's like only accessible with like a lot of grant funding, or is this something that could be used in a widespread region in order to really get like a ton of data from a huge region?
So it is pretty niche equipment. Just because you get it, it says high frequency, so it's pretty like you can find sensors that are just, you get them, you get the data, and it's it maybe every day, or you go out and collect it every day. Because we have this technology that's getting it every hour, every 2 hours, and it's high frequency. It is quite hard. Ted has just commented they cost about 20 grand each. So from that perspective, you can't. An entire buoy costs 80,000. Thank you, Ted. I did not know that.
I was curious if we're thinking this could be done, long term, because that sounds like a lot of work that Megan put in. I was wondering if she could comment on how long term we could continue to do this.
Yeah, so I mean, the plan in terms of long term, how long this could go, the plan really creates the procedure so that this can keep going. I don't obviously things have to be updated each year. So as long as those updates are happening and the equipment's working properly, it can continue to be used, this plan. Once you have a major equipment malfunction and perhaps you need to buy a new sonde or buy a new buoy or something like that, then the question of what's the funding looking like comes in. But I mean, this plan really does. Its goal is so that this can become a long-term, and the plan can be used in a long-term way. And someone's asked online, I may have missed this, but there's an automatic standard check is there automatic standard checks during deployment, or do you have to correct the data based on pre and post calibration only? So we can force, we get data, like I say, every hour to 2 hours. We can force the buoy to make a measurement. So we can just tell it this is off your schedule, but go ahead and take a measurement right now. So we'll do that right before it's put out, and then once we're servicing it. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Other than that, we just use the calibration, but we do use those pre and post. Yeah, I apologize if I'm not answering your question. I'm not understanding it fully.
Well, are there any
other questions for Megan?
If not, then I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to my friend Julia to talk to you all. Thank you.